Nir. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Jay. Great to be here.
So the first time I ran across you, and I think it was where we connected, was on LinkedIn, which is actually a platform I thought was going to die, but has really made a resurrection in the last couple of years. I saw some of your content. It really kind of drew me in. I thought, man, this is awesome. I'd love to have this guy on the podcast. And here you are. So thanks for being here today.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. Yeah, great to talk to you.
So you have written multiple books, you speak at events, you have way more education than I do, and I'm excited for you to share some of those ideas with folks. I'd love to hear a little bit about your own journey, and I don't need your whole life story, but I'd love for you to kind of pack it up a little bit for us and give me kind of how did you end up where you are from an entrepreneurial perspective, and what does kind of the day-to-day look like for you as kind of a business entrepreneur?
Yeah. So before I got into the business of writing books and teaching, and I got into more of the academic side, I actually started two companies. So my first company was in the solar energy business. We started that company back in 2003, and then we sold that in 2006. That was a big life-changing event for us. It was a lot of work. I was up, when you're an entrepreneur, you got to do everything. And when an employee doesn't show up, guess who's on that roof installing that solar panel? So I was successfully, it was a lot of work. 3 years later, we sold the business, went off to Stanford Business School, got my formal education, even though I can tell you I learned a lot more in the School of Hard Knocks. Actually starting the company itself taught me just as much as going to any business school. And then at business school, I started another company with some friends of mine. We started a business in the advertising and gaming space. And this was in 2007. We had this really great vantage point where we could see, all of these businesses that were just starting to hit their stride, like Facebook and Google and Instagram and WhatsApp and Slack, and all of these companies, were doing so well so quickly. And my question was, what's the psychology behind how they do it? We would see so many businesses kind of come and go online. And what I became fascinated with, and many of these companies were my clients, I wanted to know what was it about some of my clients, some of these businesses that made them kind of flash in the pan companies, and the other ones that could sustain users, that could keep people coming back. And so what I wanted to do after that company was acquired, my last company, the second one was acquired, I had some time on my hands and I wanted to figure out what I would do next. And I had this hypothesis that in the future, habits would become increasingly important. That if you think about the digital interface that we've been working with, from desktop to laptop to mobile devices, and now wearable devices like, the Apple Watch or smartwatches, and now to auditory devices like the Amazon Alexa, where what this means is, what this evolution of technology means, that there's just less real estate to trigger people, right? There's just less room for, spammy messages and banner ads and all that. So what that means, that habits become more important, that if your customer doesn't remember to use your product or service, then you might as well not even exist. And so I really wanted to figure out what's the secret of how these huge companies like Facebook and Google and Twitter, how do they create habit forming products? And so I went to look for that book and it didn't exist. I couldn't find it. So I started researching, how do they do this? What's the secret psychology behind how these products are built? And discovered that there's actually a pattern, that when you look at these companies, it's basically 4 steps of a trigger, an action, a reward, and an investment. And that's the 4 steps to what I call the hook model, which was what my first book was about. It was all about how to build habit forming products. The idea was that we can democratize these techniques so that anyone in any business that requires, not every business needs a habit, but every business that needs a habit needs a hook. So if you want people to use your product because they want to, not because they feel like they have to, if you want to make your product as sticky as a Facebook or a YouTube or whatever, these are the fundamental tenets that you have to build into the product in order to make it into a habit. And it's been amazing. I mean, the case study I profiled in the book was the Bible app. That's the one case study that I showed in the book of how somebody can use this hook model. But since that time, we've seen all sorts of businesses and all sorts of industries. Fitbod gets people hooked to exercising in the gym. Kahoot gets kids hooked to education in the classroom. Bite Foods gets people hooked onto eating healthier food. So all of these products and services utilize this basic model to keep people coming back. So that's the story of Hook. Now that was 5 years ago. Since that time, of course, the companies that I work with are companies that are trying to use habits for good to help people improve their lives by using these products and services. But of course, there's a downside that the psychology that makes some of these products so sticky can also turn them into distractions. And so that's why about 5 years ago, I started getting into this question of how can we make sure that we can get the best of technology without letting it get the best of us. So Hooked was more for makers, and Indistractable, my latest book that just came out, is about how to control your attention and choose your life. So that's for everyone. That's for anyone who struggles with distraction, including myself. I was patient zero.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, gosh, I don't know who doesn't struggle with distraction. I mean, I'm really excited about this conversation because I think that both of those things are areas where a lot of people, including me, really struggle. And there's a lot of criticism of, things like the iPhone, for example, and what were the consequences? Did Steve Jobs really know the consequences, or did Apple really know the consequences of what they were creating culturally when they released this device? And I mean, it's addicting. I mean, there's no question that, getting into my email, just my email, it's not even a video game. Like, I'm going to check my email is so habitual. I want to pull it on my phone. The first thing I want to do, and I had to physically delete the email app off of my phone to stop doing it. And then I found myself almost subconsciously going to gmail.com, logging in just to check my email. I was trying to create barriers for myself, essentially, to stop myself from doing the habit that I didn't want to do. And I still forced my way to find my way around it.
And here's the thing, right? So here's the big revelation. By the way, I was in your exact same spot, right? I am an industry insider who understands how these technologies are used. And I found myself using them too much. I found myself getting distracted. I was with my daughter one afternoon. This was kind of the seminal moment when I decided I had to do something. I was with my daughter one afternoon. We had this beautiful time together, and we had this Daddy and Me book of different activities that daddies and daughters could do together. And one of the activities in the book was to ask each other this question. I remember it verbatim. If you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want? And I remember the question, but I don't remember what she said, because as she was telling me the answer to the question, I was busy looking at my phone, doing something, checking email, I don't even know what, and I wasn't paying attention to her. And she got the message that whatever was on my phone was more important than she was. And she left the room. She went to go play with some toy outside. And when I looked up, she was gone. And so that's really when I realized that, the skill of this century, I think, and if I could have any superpower, it would be to become indistractable. I mean, and let me just, it's a made up word. I made it up. So let me just make sure I convey what this word means. It doesn't mean you never get distracted. That's impossible. What becoming indistractable means is that you are the kind of person who strives to do what they say they're going to do. It's about living with personal integrity. I mean, how amazing would it be if you just did what you said you're going to do, right? We would never, to be called a liar is such a put down. You would never want someone to think you lied to them, or you lied to your kids, or you lied to your friends. That's a despicable thing to do. And yet every day, day in and day out, I lied to myself. I would say I was going to exercise. I'd skip today. I would say I'm going to do that big project at work. I'm not going to procrastinate. I'd put it off. I'd say I'm going to be fully present with my family, with my loved ones, and I wouldn't. I would check my device. And so the idea here is, wouldn't it be amazing if you simply did whatever it is that you said you're going to do? So I'm not here to preach any values to people. Everybody knows what they should do. They know the kind of person they want to become. What I want to help people do is to do whatever it is that they themselves say is important to them, which, by the way, can include checking email, going on Facebook, checking your iPhone. You see, we love to vilify the products. And every other book that I've read on this topic, they all tell you to do the same thing. Get rid of the technology. The technology is the problem. The technology is doing it to you. And it's not true. That's the symptom, not the disease. And you just proved it, right? You talked about how you took these steps, and I did too. I got myself a flip phone with no internet connection. I got myself a word processor from the 1990s because I thought technology was the problem. And I still got distracted. I would read a book that I said, I should probably read that for work, or let me just tidy up my desk here. Let me take out the trash. I'll do the laundry, for God's sakes, anything to avoid doing the things that I said I was going to do. Why? Why do we do that? And so I think in this age, where there is no more knowledge gap, right? We don't have an excuse to say, I don't know what to do, right? If you want to lose weight, we know what to do. If you want to be good at your job, you know what to do. If you want to have good relationships with your family, you basically know what to do, right? And if you don't, use Google. It's all out there. The question is, why don't we do it? That's what I seek to solve with this book.
So talk to me about the idea then, because what you're talking about with the indistractable term which I love that you made up a term, a smart way to write a book, is how would you compare that or contrast it with just straight up procrastination? What is the difference between those two things?
Great question. So let me go ahead and define what I mean by distraction. What does this term even mean when we use the term distraction? The best way to understand what distraction is to understand what it is not. So the opposite of distraction, most people would tell you, is focus. It is not focus. The opposite of distraction, if you actually look at the etymology of the word, the opposite of distraction is traction. So both words come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. And if you look at the spelling, they both end in the same 6-letter word, action. So traction is any action that pulls us towards what we want to do. Okay, things that we do with intent. So anything you plan to do is fine as long as you do it with intent. You want to watch Netflix? Go for it. You want to watch a football game? Do it. You want to scroll Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, whatever? Great. As long as you do it with intent, the time you plan to waste is not wasted time. That's traction. Now, what's the opposite of traction? The opposite of traction is distraction. Anything you do that takes you off your plan, things that you are not doing with intent. So this would happen to me all the time. I would sit down at my desk and I'd say, okay, now I'm going to do that focused writing time. Now I'm going to do that project I've been procrastinating on. Now I'm going to do the thing I said I was going to do. Right after I check email, right after I scroll that Slack channel or just do that bit of research I've been meaning to do real quick, right? And I would put off doing the thing I said I was going to do, thinking, oh, that's worky, right? That's kind of like something that's productive. I should probably do that, right? No, it is just as much of a distraction because it's not what you plan to do. So procrastination, to answer your question, is one form of distraction. Procrastination is when you put off a task you plan to do for later, okay? It is distraction, but it's not the only kind of distraction. So when I was with my daughter and I was using my phone as opposed to being fully present with her, that wasn't procrastination, but it was a distraction. So procrastination is a subset of distraction.
Ooh, that is really good. I feel like I just got like a full college education right there in just a few minutes.
There you go. Free of charge.
Well, thank you so much. I think our audience will thank you. The whole idea that traction is a subset of distraction makes complete sense. First of all.
Procrastination is a subset.
I'm sorry. What I meant to say was that traction was the opposite of distraction. That's what I meant to say on focus. And it's really resonates a lot with me in business because one of the books that we started implementing is a book called Traction, ironically, by a guy named Gino Wickman. And it has had remarkable impact with regards to how we have grown as a company. And this really just gave me a lot of clarity with regards to why that was happening, because it's not like we're not doing more work than we were before.
You're doing the right things.
We're still kind of doing similar work to what we were doing before. But the big difference is every quarter we sit down and go, hey, what are the big things? What are the big rocks that we're trying to knock out this quarter? And with intention, all of the other tasks that are driven around it drive us towards that rock. So at the end of the quarter, actually every week when we review it, but at the end of the quarter, we look back and go, were those big things completed? Yes or no? And because the answer is yes, because there was intention, it creates traction and the company grows. Funny how that works.
You're giving me goosebumps saying this because that is so true. And it makes sense. It resonates with people when you talk about it on a business level. And the same holds true on a personal level. That when we start, so what I suggest that people do is to start with their values and to turn their values into time. You know, we love to talk a good game when we talk about our values. If you asked me, what are your values? What do you value in life? Well, I would tell you, oh, you know what? My health is really important to me. I got to take care of my body. But if you look at my calendar, there was no time for it. Or if you say, oh, my friends, my family, those things are important to me. Yeah, but my family got whatever time was left over after work. And so one of the things that we have to do in the 21st century, if we are going to become indistractable, is that we have to make time for these things in our day, or it's just not going to happen. You know what you're going to do with white space on your calendar? You'll check Facebook, you'll check Instagram, you'll putz around. Just like for your business, if you don't define what it is and when you're going to do those things, they're not going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally believe in that. And I need to do a better job at it in the areas where I say those values are really important. So are you, it sounds like you probably are you the kind of person who believes in kind of time blocking your schedule? So you're like, all right, from 9 to 9:30, I'm going to sit down and meditate. From 9:30 to 10, I'm going to read this particular book. Is that kind of how you think through scheduling?
That's a big part of it. That's a big part of it. And that technique's been covered a lot. Folks have heard of time boxing. It's super important. I wouldn't say it's the first step. Okay, let me back up. It's step 2, actually. So there's 4 big steps to becoming indistractable. The first thing we have to do is to understand why we get distracted in the first place, right? Many people like to think that we get distracted because of the pings, the dings, it's all of our devices. That's what distracts us. But that is only one type of trigger. That's called an external trigger. An external trigger is, the pings, the dings, the rings, something in your environment that prompts you to either traction, something you want to do. So if your alarm clock goes off and it says, hey, it's time for that meeting, it's time for that workout, that's leading you towards traction. That's something you wanted to do. But if you get a notification on your phone while you're with your kid and you plan to spend quality time with someone you love, well, now it's leading you towards distraction, okay? So they're not inherently good or bad. It's about whether they serve you or you're serving it. So those are the external triggers. But here's the thing. External triggers are just a fraction of distraction. They're just a tiny part of all the things that can prompt us to do things we don't intend to do. In fact, the number one source of distraction is not the external trigger, but in fact, it's what's called an internal trigger, because most distraction starts from within. And we have to understand this fact, okay? So if we want to answer this question of why do we do things against our better interests, we have to start a layer deeper, really to first principles. Let's ask ourselves, why do we do anything? What's the nature of human motivation? Now, many people will tell you it's about carrots and sticks, right? It's about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. This goes all the way back to Freud. Freud said that this was the pleasure principle. Pursuit of pleasure, avoidance of pain. Turns out neurologically, it's not true. It's not how it works in the brain. That in fact, the way the brain gets us to do everything is not about pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain. It's pain all the way down. Everything you do is about a desire to escape discomfort. Even the pursuit of pleasurable things, wanting, craving, desire. There's a reason we say love hurts, because neurologically, that's what's going on. We know this to be true physiologically, right? If you go outside and it's cold, that doesn't feel good. That's uncomfortable. You put on a coat. If you walk back inside, now it's too hot, you take it off. If you feel hunger pangs, you eat. And when you're stuffed, oh, that doesn't feel good, you stop eating. So those are physiological sensations. The same is true for psychological sensations. When we're lonely, we check Facebook. When we're uncertain, we Google. When we're bored, ESPN, stock prices, sports score, the list, Pinterest, Reddit, the list goes on and on. Fundamentally, what we have to understand is that the reason we turn to distraction in the first place is because we want to feel something different, to satisfy some kind of psychological itch. Okay, we're like babies sucking on our thumbs. We need to grab for something to pacify something we don't want to feel. So if we don't deal with that first and foremost, we're never going to tackle distraction. Whether it's technology today, a generation ago it was television, before that it was radio, before that it was comic books. Every generation has this distracting technology that everybody thinks is melting their brains, and it never is about the technology. The technology is the symptom. The root cause is the internal trigger, the reason we are looking for these distractions in the first place. And if we don't tackle those, we're never going to be able to master these internal triggers.
So we're getting a little deep psychologically here, but I really like this because it's interesting. It relates to a lot of what we've been talking about here on marketing messaging in general, because I tell clients, we really have to understand what the customer wants, but we really have to understand what problem they're trying to overcome. And then at the end of this kind of cycle that we walk through, I say everybody does a really good job most of the time of showing customers what success looks like, but we need to show them how we're helping them avoid failure. Looks like I just lost my camera there. All right, let me back up a little bit. I'll kind of reply to what I was thinking there. Okay. So I love what we're talking about here.
The background, by the way, is not.
It's right? Fine. It's green now.
All right, no problem.
It's an audio podcast anyway, so I'll use clips from the video for promotion purposes to kind of show it off on YouTube and stuff. But I haven't published full video episodes of it anyway. Okay, clearly, we're having technical problems. I'm gonna start over responding to that input that you had there. So I think this part that you're talking about with regards to pain motivators is really, really interesting, because on the marketing side with our clients, we always tell them they've got to figure out what failure looks like for the client. If they don't use your product or service, what failure are we helping them avoid? And ultimately what we're really talking about is pain. We're helping them avoid pain in that situation. And
You're absolutely right, by the way. I mean, this is what I used to teach at Stanford as well. And when I was a lecturer in marketing there, that all behavior, every product you buy, every button you tap, every click you make online is fundamentally about one thing. And that is modulating your mood. You want to feel something different. And for the customer, it's the same exact story. What emotional state are they looking to be taken out of? So whether we're building a product that we want people to use habitually, or whether we're trying to change our own habits, we have to understand that time management is pain management. And as entrepreneurs, we fundamentally have to face this fact that we're not going to be able to focus and do what we want to do unless we know why we are doing it. And the reason why is because always we are trying to escape some kind of discomfort. So, I know a lot of entrepreneurs who fall in different categories, right? Some can't get the motivation up to do something. Some seem like they're over motivated, like they can't stop working. I have to say, put down your phone and have a conversation once in your life, because they're almost using their device as a way to escape, right? Their present reality. And when you look at workaholism, alcoholism, drug abuse, the common trait is that it always is defined by the desire to escape an uncomfortable reality.
So time management is pain management. That's a really interesting way to think of it. And I always tell people they feel like it, when they start going down that path, that it feels a little dark, because they're like, well, I don't want to talk about the negatives. I don't want to talk about pain. I'm like, but if we don't talk about them, we don't know what we're trying to actually help people get through in order to, move them in the right direction. Because if we have a product or service, whatever it is, if we're thinking about sales and marketing, that we want people to engage with, because we ultimately believe it's going to make their life better. And if we don't believe that, we probably shouldn't be selling it. But if we really believe that, we got to understand what we're trying to help fix. But what's so great about what you're talking about too is that these things apply not just for business or for marketing or for sales. It's like your whole life. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck when they're trying to grow a business, is they get stuck in this silo of, I've got to grow the business. And it almost becomes a distraction, I think, for sometimes the rest of their life. And I love what you say about how to control your attention and choose your life. Because in my book, I have a chapter that I say, ignore the system, but have a system. And the idea is basically like, who cares what everybody else thinks you have to do, but you should know what you want to do. I'd love to hear.
That leads in perfectly, actually, to the second step.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. What's number two?
Yeah, exactly. So the first step is to master the internal triggers. And there's lots of techniques that I talk about in the book about how to do that. You really only have two choices. You can either change the source of the discomfort, or you can learn tactics to cope with that discomfort in a healthier manner. And then the second step is to make time for traction. And I'm not going to tell you what your values should be. What I want to help you do is to live out your values. So if you are starting a company and you say, look, it is important to me to work 60 hours a week, 80 hours a week, whatever it is that you want to do, great, do that with your time. But I want you to be intentional about that. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to your family. It's not fair to your employees unless you are on the same page. So many people say, oh yeah, honey, I'm going to start a business. No big deal. I'm just a regular 40-hour work week. And then they have all these disagreements with their spouse and their family. They spend no time with their kids and they're miserable because they didn't get everyone on the same page. When I went to undergrad, I met my wife in college. I met her in an economics class, funny enough. And I remember we learned this term. The term is residual beneficiary. The residual beneficiary is the chump who gets whatever's left over when a business is liquidated. So it's debt holders come first, equity holders comes next, then residual beneficiaries, right? Everybody who gets whatever's left over. And my wife turned to me one day after we'd been married for several years. She said, remember that economics class? You are turning me into the residual beneficiary. I'm getting whatever time is left over, and that's not fair. And she was absolutely right. And so how do you avoid that? You plan ahead, right? It's not that hard. You sit down together, 15 minutes a week. I'll give you a link for the show notes where I created this very simple tool that we can use to do what's called a schedule syncing. And let me tell you, it saved my marriage. It made me more productive at work. It's an incredibly effective thing to do with the various stakeholders in your life, is just synchronizing your schedule so you know how do you want to plan your time this week to live up to your values. So that's step two.
What's great is I really believe, I'm one of these people that actually believes in providential timing. And I will tell you that right now, I have 5 kids. My wife homeschools them. I run a business with 17 team members, and there's a lot of stuff going on in a week. And one of the things we're struggling with right now is when and even how to properly schedule and sync our calendars together, or just our lives even between my wife and I, because I don't want her to be that residual beneficiary. So I'm really excited to download that when you send the link. I'll be the first one to sign up for it, and everybody else will send it out as well.
I mean, it literally saved my marriage. I mean, we would have all these arguments, my wife and I, about, why didn't, the household responsibilities. My wife works as well. And, I'd seen these studies that show that actually in dual income households, women still, even though they make half the money in dual income households, they still take on their unfair share of household of admin duties. And it turns out I didn't believe that. I said, honey, if I don't do something, just tell me what to do, right? What's the problem? What I didn't appreciate is that asking her to tell me what to do was itself work. Right?
Yeah. Because you're asking her to delegate the task, not the outcome. The outcome is we want to have a good life. She wants you to figure out what has to be done. And actually, that's a good point, because my wife will sometimes say, look, I just feel like you should, I feel like I'm pulling the curtain back a little bit too much, but she'll say, like, I feel like you should just know what to do. And I'm like,
oh, I heard those words verbatim. By the way,
but I don't.
Red there, Jay. I can see blushing.
That's right.
No,
real life.
Verbatim, the conversation my wife and I had a few years ago. And let me tell you, this schedule syncing process that I describe in this part 2 of the book, incredibly helpful. Not only helpful in your home life, but also with your employees, with your colleagues, because we as managers, as business owners, we love to just throw these outputs over to our employees. We say, we want you to do this. We want you to do this. We want you to do this. But think about this for a minute. If you went to a baker and you said, hey, I want 100 loaves of bread, he'd be like, okay, where's the flour? Where's the yeast? Where's the, all the other ingredients I need, the salt, whatever it is that I need. Where are all the inputs in order to give you your output? Well, with knowledge workers, somehow we think that input isn't a factor. But of course it is. The output is the stuff you want them to do. The input is their time. So we have to do these schedule syncing with our colleagues, with our employees, and it takes 15 minutes a week. It takes almost no time, and it empowers them to help them prioritize how to use their time. Because what they'll do is they'll show you their calendar, and they'll say, okay, here's all the things that I have time for this week. Here's how I've allocated my time. Here's the stuff I didn't find time for. Should I reprioritize anything? And that once a week, 15-minute meeting, it's life-changing. Let me tell you.
Well, I'm going to use it. I'm really excited about that. So step number 1 was master the internal triggers. Step number 2 was make time for traction. Step number 3?
Hack back external triggers. So hacking back external triggers, we talked about those external triggers that can lead us towards traction or distraction. And we have to ask this question, is the external trigger serving me, or am I serving it? So I give you these 8 different environments that we work in, along with email, your phone, your laptop, group chat, meetings, all of these things all of these environments that we work in that we can hack back. Now, one of the most pernicious sources of distraction has nothing to do with technology. It's the open floor plan office. Right?
Which mine is, of course.
There you go. So many of it. And there's nothing wrong. Okay, here's why we have open floor plan offices, because they save us a ton of money. We don't have to give everyone a private office. They save a ton of money. Here's the thing. Unfortunately, studies have found, and I cite many of them in the book, they lead to a ton of distraction. You see somebody, they come by, let's gossip, let's chit chat. Did you see the game yesterday? And people get off track. Now, there's nothing wrong with chit chatting with your colleagues. You should do it. But you shouldn't do it on their schedule. You should do it, at lunch. Do it when you want to, as opposed to, I was right in the middle of that big project and now I'm interrupted. And the studies find that it takes you about 20 minutes to get back to work if you are interrupted by someone. So what's the solution? In every copy of Indistractable, there's a screen sign. It's a special piece of cardstock that you pull out of the book. It's bright red. You fold it into thirds and you put it on your computer monitor. And it says, I'm indistractable at the moment. Please come back later. And that simple sign and that culture, it has to be something that you perpetuate, especially if you're in management, it's something you can say, okay, this is what we're doing now. You put it up for an hour and a half per day. That's your focused work time. And if that's one of your values, and almost everybody listening to this podcast, if you're a knowledge worker, your job is to produce creative solutions to hard problems. But here's the thing, you can't do that if you don't have time to think. So many of us, we're just running around all day, responding to stuff, right? Responding to emails, responding to group chat, responding to meetings, and we have no time for reflection. So we only focus on the stuff that's urgent and important, as opposed to also making time for the stuff that is just as important, but less urgent. That stuff gets procrastinated to the next day, to the next day, to the next day. And without making time for it, you're going to be in bad shape in a few years because you've never had time to think for yourself. What's next for my business? How do I continue to grow it? If you don't make time for reflection, you're not doing your best work.
This is super practical. I think it's going to be really helpful for a lot of listeners, which is great. I love that idea of the sign on the computer because we try and do that with headphones.
Yes.
It doesn't work very well.
It doesn't work. And here's why it doesn't work. Because people think you're watching YouTube. So they're like, hey, you don't mind if I bother you, right, Jay? Because what are you listening to a podcast right now? What are you doing?
Exactly. Right.
So we want to make it a very explicit message.
Yeah. I like the explicit nature of that. We're going to do that too. So another example of hack back the external triggers. Would this be the same thing? For example, I wear an Apple Watch, but I hate all the notifications on it. So I literally just disable all notifications on the watch.
Yep.
Is that kind of the same thing? Like you're disabling notifications. That's a technological version. You're putting a sign on your screen. You're stating, kind of putting your flag in the ground, if you will, and saying, no, I'm claiming this time for me to focus on this one thing that's a priority for me, again, leading to intentionality, which leads to traction.
Right. So I talk about how to make your phone indistractable, how to make your computer indistractable. But to be honest, that stuff's kind of kindergarten stuff. I only spend a few pages on that because who doesn't know, right? Like turn off those stupid notifications. Zuckerberg can't turn them back on. Turn them off, for God's sakes. Why do you need to be interrupted all day long by every stupid news alert? You don't. Turn them off, for God's sakes. And so, but that's kind of the kindergarten stuff. What's much more important is the distractions people don't see coming. People don't realize what a huge distraction inner office distraction is. Group chat, meetings, holy smokes, how distracting are stupid meetings, right? So I give you rules to how to make sure you have an indistractable meeting.
This is going to be great. I'm so excited about taking some of these things back to our team, but also to my life. I was thinking just now about my wife again, because she's home with 5 kids all day. There's nothing more distracting than being the mother of 5 children and also being their teacher. And so we were just talking about how she really needed to be able to carve out time in her day that's her time, that she can do whatever she needs to do with it. Read her Bible, read a book, take a nap. I don't care what it is. Like she needs to be able to carve out that time, but she keeps getting distracted. It just fits in so well because I just had this idea. She almost needs because she'll go to her bedroom and close the door, but it's not good enough. They'll knock on the door. They'll open the door. They think she, again, is just like doing nothing and they can just distract her. Right. But what if we did the same thing that you did with the idea there with the computer monitor and put the sign on the door? And we're like, hey, when this sign's in this little holder or when this thing's turned around, do not knock on this door. And if you do, there are consequences.
So let me tell you what we do in my household. So I work from home. My wife works from home. We also homeschool our child. And we went on Amazon and my wife did this. She got what we lovingly call today the concentration crown. The concentration crown is this wreath that has LED lights in it. And so you can't miss it. You turn it on, it's, bright. And so when my daughter comes in and she sees the concentration crown, she knows, okay, I cannot bother mommy right now. She's doing her focused work. And frankly, I was guilty of that too, right? I'd be like, honey, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Well, when the concentration crown is on, you can't
don't do it.
Workplace, of course. But for those of us who work from home, it's incredibly effective.
I love that. I think it's so great because all of these principles are not things that just apply at work or just apply at home. It's all of life, and life is just kind of this bucket. So now I'm excited to hear what
our children, by the way, just sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
If you think the world is distracting now, just wait a few years, right? That's why I say that becoming indistractable is the skill of the century. We have to teach our kids these skills now by modeling these skills. If we can't handle this stuff, we are modeling to our kids that we have no control over our attention in our life. And so then we yell at them and say, get off Fortnite, stop going on social media. Meanwhile, we're checking email. So, if you have kids, you have got to start modeling this type of behavior so that they can learn how to become indistractable themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are just great insights, and it just applies to all things, especially parenting. I mean, it's amazing. All right, I'm holding my breath for number 4 here. What is it? So let me recap. Number 1, master internal triggers. Number 2, make time for traction. Number 3, hack back external triggers. And number 4
is prevent distraction with Pacts. So pacts are what's called a pre-commitment device. And this is an ancient technique. Homer wrote about it in the Odyssey 2,500 years ago, believe it or not. People were struggling with distraction forever. And a pre-commitment is basically when we make a promise to ourselves, we do something today that prevents us from getting distracted in the future. So there's some very practical things you can do, like you can make an effort pact, which is where you put a bit of friction in between you and the thing you don't want to do. So for example, you can actually use technology to prevent technology distraction. All kinds of apps out there that I talk about that you can use to block out distraction when you want to focus. But one of my favorite pacts, there's three types of pacts. There's an effort pact, a price pact, and an identity pact. And the identity pact is probably the most powerful. It's why you see me wearing this shirt right now that says Indistractable as we're doing this interview. If you're listening, you can't see it, but trust me, I'm wearing a black shirt with white letters that says Indistractable. Because there's a lot of research that comes from the psychology of religion, actually, that shows us that when we have a moniker, when we have an identity, that helps us stay on track. So if you think about how, a vegetarian doesn't wake up every morning and say, should I have bacon today? No, vegetarians don't eat meat. That's who they are. It's part of their identity. A devout Muslim doesn't say, I wonder if I should have some beer. No, a devout Muslim doesn't drink alcohol. It's part of who they are. So forming that identity is incredibly powerful. And that's why I made up this word. It's, Indistractable is a made up word. I wanted this to sound like indestructible. I wanted it to be a moniker that we can tell people, oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I don't answer every email at your beck and call. I don't, respond within 30 seconds of getting your text message because I'm indistractable. I value doing what it is I say I'm going to do. I live with personal integrity, and I made a promise to myself. This is my time to be with my kids. This is my time to work out. This is my time to read a book. So I may not be responsive at all day, every minute of the day and night. There will be some times for that, right? Like, let's say your job requires that. That's totally fine. But that should be part of your identity, how you call yourself. And it turns out there's many studies that show that by calling yourself a particular identity, it makes it much more likely that you will stay on track and not get distracted.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting because usually in this point in the podcast, I kind of shift gears and I always want to talk about work-life balance. But I feel like what we've been talking about is really practical strategies around how to have just that. And I'm not a big fan of the word work-life balance. I think there are seasons of life where things go all over the place. But I'd love to hear how you think this indistractable idea kind of fits into that question that everybody has. It seems to be this thing people are seeking, right? I'm seeking balance or harmony or whatever it is. How does indistractable fit into that thought process?
Yeah, I hate the term as well. And I don't know why, but I think I hate the term because it seems to put all the blame on the workplace. That if we just didn't have to work so much, we'd have plenty of time. But historically, that's not true. We know that people have more leisure time than ever. It doesn't seem like it. We all seem like we're so busy, right? But you know what we're busy with? Watching television. The average American watches 5 hours of television a night, according to Nielsen.
Wow.
We're spending it on Facebook. We're spending it during watching football games. We're doing frivolous activities, and we don't even find satisfaction in them. So the idea here is, if you want to work a lot, work a lot. If you want to make time for your family, to work out, to pray, to meditate, to paint, whatever it is you want to do it. But do it with intent. So work-life balance only happens when you plan ahead. If there is one motto I want people to remember from this interview and from my book, maybe my life's work, is this: that the antidote for impulsiveness is forethought. If you leave it to willpower and self-control to do what you want to do, you're going to lose. Okay. If the chocolate cake is on the fork on its way to your mouth, you're going to eat it. If the cigarette is lit and it's in your hand, you're going to take a puff. If you sleep next to your cell phone as close as you sleep next to your lover, you're going to pick it up first thing in the morning. You've already lost. The antidote is to plan ahead. You want work-life balance? Plan for it. Make a system. Use these 4 steps of master the internal triggers, make time for traction, hack back the external triggers, and prevent distraction with Pacts. By doing these 4 things, this is how we don't even require willpower or self-control anymore, because we have a system in place that helps us become indistractable.
That is so good. It reminds me, my dad used to tell me whenever I'd come to him with something that I had planned poorly, he would say, "Your lack of planning does not constitute an emergency on my part." and it kind of reminds me to some of this, Well, this has been exceptionally helpful for me personally. So thank you so much for that. And I think it's going to be really helpful for everybody that listens. This is one of those episodes where I'm going to tell everybody on the team, hey, y'all got to go listen to this. I'm going to tell my wife, hey, you got to go listen to this. And I'm going to get everybody the book as well, because I think it's just going to be great. So I'm really excited to pass that around and share it with our team. As you think about parting thoughts for people who want to build a business that lasts, because that's the focus of this podcast, I think everything we've talked about has been really practical there. But is there anything else that you'd like to kind of go, hey, there's one last thing I want you to take away, or one thing I want you to remember from this conversation? What would that be?
I think it's the idea that we are more powerful than we think. That I think there's a narrative these days particularly around technology, that somehow we're powerless, that it's hijacking our brains, that it's addictive, and that ain't true. We want it to be true. Talk about motivated reasoning. We love the idea of blaming something else. But of course, this leads to what psychologists call learned helplessness.
Yeah.
And when you believe there's nothing you can do about something, you don't do anything about it. And so if there's one thought I want to leave people with, is that we can do something about this. This is not something that we should just, say, oh, our kids are, addicted to Fortnite, or, I'm addicted to email. No, you're probably not. I mean, there are some people who are addicted to some things, just like, not everyone who has a beer with dinner is an alcoholic. Not everyone who has sex is a sex addict. Not everyone who plays poker once in a while is a problem gambler. Some people do get addicted. Yeah. Chances are 99% of people listening right now, there is no addictive disorder. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just about having a new system and believing, first and foremost, that we can do something about this.
That's so great. Really powerful, really helpful. If people want to find you online, they want to get your books, well, where's the best place for them to do that? Where do you want people to go?
Sure. So my blog is nirandfar.com. Nir is spelled like my first name, N-I-R. So that's nirandfar.com. And if you want more information about Indistractable, the book is called Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. It's available wherever books are sold. But if you go to Indistractable.com, there is an 80-page workbook that we couldn't fit into the book. It was too much, so we took it out, but you can get that. That's complimentary, as well as a video course also that's also free, all at Indistractable.com. And it's the word distract, able.com.
That is so awesome. I'm going to put all those links in the show notes so people have access to them wherever they happen to be listening or watching. Nir, thank you so much for your wisdom, advice, and counsel today. I think it has been a really great episode. I think it's been really helpful for those who listen. So I appreciate you being here.
Oh, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Hey, I hope this video has helped you with some tips and ideas to build a business that lasts. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on the next videos that we roll out. And more importantly, for some awesome free resources, head over to our website at buildingabusinessthatlasts.com. You can get a free copy of my book there, where I tell you how I have built an agency that's grown year over year for the last 20 years in a row. So go grab that, buildingabusinessthatlasts.com, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thanks. We'll see you soon.